Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a highly significant document that came out in April 2024, the Expertise Report on Police and Complaint Boards. We're going to take a really hard, structured look at the complex and sometimes messy landscape of police accountability in Germany. Specifically, we'll be focusing on how the system actually handles allegations of anti-Black racism. We're going to unpack the data, look at the legal frameworks, and walk through some very real-world case studies presented in this research just to understand exactly how these systems are functioning today. It all begins with a fundamental question, doesn't it? It's one that really sits at the absolute core of any democratic society. Who watches the police? Think about it. When the state grants an institution the unique, immense authority to use force, how on earth does society ensure that power is exercised fairly, lawfully, and without discrimination? A democracy absolutely must have mechanisms in place to hold its own protectors accountable. But as this research reveals, the gap between that theoretical ideal of accountability and the everyday reality, it's vast. Okay, let's dive into this. International law actually sets a very clear standard here. According to mandates from the United Nations and the European Court of Human Rights, an independent police complaint board must be completely separated from the police and from interior ministries. The absolute keyword here is independent. These international bodies have said time and time again that to impartially investigate alleged misconduct or human rights violations, the investigating body literally cannot have hierarchical or institutional ties to the very people it's supposed to be investigating.
So the crucial difference we're looking at lies between internal and external control. Internal control is, well, essentially the police investigating the police, or it's complaint boards that are led by the interior ministries, which are the exact same ministries in charge of the police forces in the first place. On the flip side, external control involves completely independent ombudsmen, direct parliamentary oversight, and civil society organizations. While external control represents the human rights ideal for impartial justice, the reality on the ground often leans way heavily toward internal mechanisms. And when we look at how this plays out in Germany, we see what can really only be described as a classic bureaucratic patchwork. Imagine living in a country where your avenue for justice depends entirely on which state line you just crossed, because there is no unified federal standard for police complaint boards. Instead, 8 of the 16 federal states have established parliamentary commissioners, while the others rely entirely on those internal ministry-led boards we just talked about. What this creates is a system with wildly varying powers, resources, and accessibility depending on your zip code. And crucially, this is a big one. Even where independent commissioners do exist, they almost always lack independent criminal investigative powers, meaning they can't actually bring criminal charges themselves. All of this systemic confusion brings us directly to the core focus of the expertise, the actual experience of Black people in Germany. Grounded in the framework of the UN Decade for People of African Descent, the research stresses that independent complaint mechanisms aren't just some administrative preference. No, they are a vital necessity to combat structural racism. Without independent oversight, structurally marginalized communities often find themselves with quite literally nowhere to turn when experiencing discrimination by state actors. To understand why this is so absolutely critical, we've got to look at the numbers. The 2020 Afro Census, which was this groundbreaking quantitative study on Black life in Germany, revealed a striking figure. 93.9% of all respondents reported experiencing discrimination based on racist grounds or ethnic origin across various areas of life. Let that sink in. Now, narrowing that down specifically to law enforcement, another staggering number emerges: 85.1%. That is the percentage of respondents who stated they specifically experienced discrimination by the police based on their skin color. This isn't just a few isolated incidents. This is a widespread, heavily documented experience within the community. And it sets the stage for exactly why effective complaint boards are being scrutinized so closely. But here is where the institutional disconnect becomes highly visible. Despite these incredibly high rates of reported experiences, there is a massive dark figure of unreported cases. A major European Union study found that a stunning 40% of affected people in Germany don't report incidents of discrimination at all. Why? Because they simply lack trust in the system. They firmly believe that going through the hassle of reporting the incident won't actually change a single thing. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that beyond a lack of trust, there's just a massive barrier to access. A mere 28% of respondents in Germany were even aware that reporting mechanisms or counseling centers existed. Think about that for a second. A massive 72% were completely in the dark. A complaint board cannot possibly be effective if the people who need it most don't even know it's there. It's just a critical failure in public awareness. And this isn't an isolated issue found in just one study. The 2023 National Discrimination and Racism Monitor, or NADIRA, reinforces these exact findings. It concluded that Black people in Germany face the highest average rates of both overt and subtle discrimination in public spaces, and specifically by the police, compared to other groups. So we are looking at a structurally documented reality here. It's supported by multiple major studies, not just individual anecdotes.
To illustrate how this patchwork of independent boards actually handles severe incidents, the research examines a real-world case study, the deeply tragic death of Medard Mutombo in Berlin in 2023. Mr. Mutombo, a Black man, collapsed and later died following a police operation where officers were called to assist in transferring him to a psychiatric facility. The Berlin Police Ombudsman, one of those external oversight bodies we discussed earlier, opened an investigation into the police conduct during this fatal incident.
When reviewing the incident, the Berlin Police Ombudsman stated, and I quote, "I cannot exclude that the deployment was more robust than perhaps with a white person. The problem lay not in the skin color, but in the illness." End quote. This exact, somewhat ambivalent statement really highlights how current oversight bodies analyze or perhaps struggle to categorize the intersection of race and mental health in policing. He maintains that the primary driver of the escalation was the illness, while simultaneously acknowledging the potential for a, quote, more robust physical deployment. This creates a jarring institutional friction within the current system. On one side, you have the ombudsman, who found no racial motive, and while he concluded that the police entering the room was technically unlawful, he ultimately found the physical operation itself was not objectionable. But on the other side, following a complaint filed by the victim's brother, the state prosecutor actually reopened criminal investigations against the officers. This perfectly illustrates how administrative oversight and criminal justice can reach entirely different thresholds and conclusions for the exact same event. So, faced with these systemic gaps and the harsh realities of how severe cases are handled, how do we fix it? Well, Black civil society organizations, specifically groups like EOTN ISD, have laid out concrete solutions. And in this report, these demands are treated not just as community feedback, but as vital expert recommendations necessary to actually bring the German system in line with international human rights standards.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what actionable steps look like. They translate into 3 critical demands for accountability. First up, legally banning racial profiling and totally eliminating the legal basis for unprovoked suspicionless checks. Second, commissioning intersectional studies on police practices so we can actually understand how race, mental health, and other factors compound during police interactions. And third, establishing truly independent, centralized complaint boards that are completely detached from interior ministries and are equipped with actual investigative teeth. Ultimately, all of this leaves us with one critical, defining question to chew on. What does true, independent accountability actually look like? As we've seen through the data, the structural limitations, and the real-world case studies, there is a massive, undeniable gap between international human rights expectations and the patchwork reality operating in Germany today. If the people assigned to watch the public aren't watched by a transparent, trusted, and unquestionable system, can true justice even exist? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.